All right. Thank you. Again, I'm Hershula Davis, and I work in the Office of Audit Services. And I know you may hear audit and cringe a little bit, but we do more than just auditing. We do assist with some monitoring, but we also provide indirect cost rate calculations that your federal programs utilize, and we are responsible for some state and federal reporting, and we provide technical assistance. So, with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I will say that this is a presentation that I have done in the past at another conference with one of my colleagues who was unable to be here. So the first part that she usually covers, I'll cover. I'll try to do as good as she has in the past. And then the latter part is what I usually present on, which is the details related to the documentation that we would like to see and require for support of your expenditures. All right, so welcome. But today I am going to talk about what I feel is really important information. It's useful information, and that is just to discuss with you why accurate information is so vital and important. Also, talk to you about the terms, assurances, and conditions that your district sign off on, saying that you are going to follow all of these requirements. Talk to you about how the documentation really truly supports how you spent the money and where you can find some resources that will assist you if you ever have questions about what's required that you can refer back to. Okay? So, first things first, why is having accurate documentation important? Well, simply put, it tells the story, right? It provides evidence to support what happened. Y'all are working hard in the district to support your students, but if there's not documentation there, when people like me and the program office come in, we don't know what happened. So I have a saying that I like to say, and if it ain't documented, it didn't happen, right? And so to avoid that, you want to ensure that you are following our guidelines to make sure you have what's needed. Accurate documentation reduces audit findings and monitoring findings from people like myself. So you want to make sure that you are maintaining that documentation to support what you did with your federal funds. I will make this disclaimer that this presentation is not a substitute for you yourselves reading your federal regulations, the laws, reading those assurances, terms, and conditions for your subawards, as well as any applicable guidance that is passed through from our agency to your districts. In addition, I like to say make sure you read and reread those guidelines and regulations. You may get the assurances, terms, and conditions at the beginning of the year and like put it to the side, but it's a good habit to go back and refer back to it to make sure that as you're going throughout the school year that you are complying. Same with any federal regulations or guidance passed through from the department. Just making sure that every now and again you go back and give your brain a refresher. If you have questions, always refer to that as well as contact us, right? So just I encourage you to refer back to your sub grant award, your like I mentioned, those assurances and terms and conditions and any applicable state and federal regulations. So I'm going to jump in with talking about findings. This is titled Recent Audit Findings. However, I may need to retitle this slide to say just common audit findings, unfortunately. When we are conducting our audits and doing some monitoring, we tend to see a lot of missing policies and procedures. There are required policies and procedures that your district should have in writing to support your federal programs. We notice inadequate timekeeping and time and effort documentation. Yes, these are federal funds. You have to make sure you're documenting the salaries with timekeeping records as well as time and effort documentation. And I will talk more in detail about what that looks like near the end of my presentation. Lack of documentation or insufficient documentation. What did I say? If it ain't documented, it didn't happen, right? Which will um, cause sometimes money to come back, and we don't want that. Um, again, time and effort documentation not being maintained, lack of contracts and related documentation. So, yes, sometimes we are seeing where districts and other subgrantees don't have a contract. And that should not be the case. You have to have contracts when contracts are warranted and the related documentation to show how you procured whatever services that you selected for your federal program, and lack of documentation to sufficiently support how I just talked about this, how items were procured. So we do see this. We see this kind of frequently. So we are hoping that, as we do presentations like this, as you get comfortable with asking questions, that you can avoid these types of findings. So, accurate documentation is not only useful for avoiding audit findings and monitoring findings, it also shows taxpayers where their money is going, right? We pay taxes. We want to make sure that the money that's coming in is being spent according to how it should be spent on the purpose of the federal grant award. It enables transparency. There's always people asking questions. They are looking, they want to know how this money spent, i.e., legislators, right? Meets requirements for record retention, meets my expectations, and reduces and it mitigates the risk of waste, fraud, and abuse. So if you're requiring adequate documentation, correct documentation, it's going to deter some of those who may want to utilize funds for incorrect, improper purposes, right? So these are really good to keep in mind to help you remember why documentation is so helpful and needed and useful. Um, also, you don't have a choice. It is required. You get these federal funds, and we say, hey, you have to support these expenditures accurately and according to the guidance that we provide you. So it's it's required for your expenditures, like I mentioned. If there's any matching requirements, there's documentation that's needed to support that, as well as if you have a federal grant with any kind of in-kind contributions, yes, those should be adequately documented as well to show the in-kind services or goods or what have you were received. So when we think of documentation, we may automatically always think about a receipt or an invoice or a contract. However, it is important to remember that documentation includes your general ledger. Now, I don't think I have any finance people in here. Or, oh, okay, hi. So you understand where I'm coming from when I say that you have to document these expenditure transactions in your general ledger. That is very important to support your expenditures as well. Subgrants issued to your district are reimbursement. So when we are verifying how you spent the money, we're not just looking at, like I said, those invoices and receipts. We're also looking at your general ledger. We're making sure that when you're submitting claims for reimbursement through our GAP system, which is the system that you utilize for requesting reimbursement for federal funds, that you have requested documentation based on your general ledger activity. So all transactions, all expenditures should be shown in your general ledgers. So who's familiar with Uniform Grant Guidance, also known as UGG 2 CFR Part 200? I don't see any hands. Okay. All right, y'all were about to scare me a little bit. Okay, so this particular guidance has been around for now over 10 years. I say that because it just seems like yesterday we were trying to implement and get it, make sure we as an agency ourselves were in compliance. But for those who may not have heard of this guidance, it's the federal guidance that years and years ago, there were 8 circulars that were out. And what OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, decided to do was to come up with a way to streamline, include all of these 8 circulars into one set place for you to go to refer to for compliance. So with that, it rolled out in December of 2014. It was updated again in 2020, and then a little more recently in 2024. It includes administrative regulations, information on your cost principles, and it also includes audit regulations and some other really good information. So if you want to add something to your reading list, go ahead and add that. But no, just have it handy so that you can refer to that as well. So the goal, they wanted again to streamline, make it in one place, so you won't have to go to this circular for this or that circular for that. It's all right here, right? And UGG applies to all federal awards. It's not just your Title I. It's not just your CTE or 21st century. It applies to all. So USDA, how your lunch programs are ran, it applies to that. Now that there has been a shift for some of our federal awards to go to Department of Labor or to HHS, guess what? These regulations right here follow the funds because it applies to every single federal agency, all federal funds. Okay. So I mentioned that it was updated. With the last update, it was some slight verbiage change to the required certifications that we have to make sure are signed off on by our sub grantees. And so this excerpt is from our GAPS system, and this is the certification that your districts are certifying, assuring that they're going to comply with when they're going into GAPS. That's our reimbursement system to request expenditures, because again, it is reimbursement. Expenditures were already incurred and paid, and so you're going in, signing off, saying that that has happened. So when the last update came about, they changed the word report to information. Just like I said, like slight changes, but we wanted you to be aware of the change. But also we have here highlighted in blue, expenditures have to be incurred prior to requesting reimbursement and paid. It has to be paid reimbursement. This is more information on the update, still to the certification language. Here, like I said, just minor changes, but near the end of the certification is where they removed the general types of offenses like fraud, false statements, false claims, and they are referring you to the federal regulations. So they are wanting you to go and familiarize yourself with these regulations. Okay, so when you have an opportunity, take some time and visit Title 18 and Title 31. Okay. All right, so now I will discuss some of the specific requirements we have as your district's pass-through agency. So yes, we don't just give you the money and then we're all good. We have to comply with things as well. One of the things that we had to do when the Uniform Grant Guidance came out was to assess your risk of noncompliance. And how we ensure that we're doing that is through an annual risk assessment process. How many in here have heard of your district having a risk score? Yes. So that has come about from the UGG, and we worked hard years ago to come up with this process. We have, 10 criteria that we rate your districts on. It is not meant to be punitive. It is meant to be a resource for ourselves as well as you, to determine which districts need monitoring, as well as, more importantly, to provide technical assistance to those who may be struggling in some areas, right? Nobody's perfect. Sometimes you need a little help here and there. So we do this annual risk assessment of our subrecipients. We look at your performance. That's your programmatic, your financial performance. We look at your systems. We want to make sure that when it comes to your fiscal side of handling your grants, that you are in compliance. We do look at any significant changes in your program. So we do look at any turnover that occurs. We like to say, even if there's just one person that retires and somebody comes in, that is a level of turnover. So we have to look at that. We look at your single audit findings that you have, or maybe you didn't have any, but we look at your single audit reports, and we look at some other things such as your accreditation. Were there any test security or cheating violations? Was your district in the news? Right? So, so we look at these different things when we're doing the risk assessment process. Also, we are required to provide you with a contract. That is your GAN that you receive, as well as we have you sign those assurances, terms, and conditions that I've already mentioned. Um, these are legally binding contracts that your district is signing off on and saying that you will comply with the requirements as you perform with these federal funds. Okay, and your superintendent, as well as our superintendent Ellen Weaver, they sign off on it because it's a contract. Okay. Um, we also make sure that you have an accounting system that can support you receiving these federal funds. We don't so much worry about this with our districts, but we do provide funding to some nonprofits who may not be as robust as you all. And we do also provide funding to colleges and universities. So the same requirements you have, we spread it across to all of our subrecipients. And so we are required to make sure you have adequate internal controls to manage your federal funds. And that's touched on in the insurances section of that document I'm mentioning. It also goes on to say that you have to have a financial system that can differentiate expenditures by source of funding, programmatic year, budget line item, and whether the cost is direct, indirect, or administrative. We handle that at SCDE for you, the indirect cost part. Whenever you're submitting your finance area, submitting their annual audits to us, we are separating your costs, making sure they're classified right so we can make sure you are claiming indirect costs in accordance with USED's guidance. So the italics here emphasize that you as a subgrantee has committed to having a financial system that can do all of the things, right? That can differentiate between source of funding, that you are tracking all of your expenditures, you are booking your revenue that you receive, all of that, okay? And it also goes on to say that you are supporting your expenditures with source documentation such as receipts, travel vouchers, invoices, what have you, whatever documentation is required. And again, I'm going to get into that shortly. Okay, so yeah, I'm about to jump into it now. So also in the terms and conditions section of that assurances, terms and conditions for federal subawards, it talks about documentation. It's saying it here again. Ellen signed off on it. Your superintendent signed off on it, saying that you are going to maintain accurate and time. You are going to provide, accurate and timely recording of receipts and expenditures. Here is a link to a very important document for determining what type of documentation is required for each type of expenditure, and that is our guidelines for retaining documentation to support expenditures. It is embedded in the terms, assurances, and conditions for federal subawards. Okay, and it's also found on our website. So, you might put this document aside and not see it again until you got to re-sign it next year. Well, our website is available for you to visit this document so that you can make sure you are compliant. So now I have some details for you. I have some examples of good and bad documentation. Okay, so let's jump in. Any questions? Okay. Guidelines for retaining documentation to support expenditures. So this is the Bible for what we require for maintaining documentation to support each type of expenditure. So it is divided by or arranged by salaries, employee benefits, purchase services, and supplies and materials. Okay, so salaries. We Again, these are federal funds, so time and effort documentation is required. So you have to have an employee timesheet for those what is it, non-salaried employees. I don't have that here, but if they're salaried, they would not require a timesheet, but you have to support the salaries paid to them with, salary agreements, all of that. But if they are not salaried employees, they have to have a timesheet. But either way, if they're salaried or non-salaried employees, they have to have a record of time and effort, which is either a personnel activity report, also referred to as a PAR, or a semi-annual certification, whichever applies. Okay. Um, we do review terms of employment, so you should be maintaining, of course, your employee's name, their position, those salary agreements should have all of that information, their job descriptions, listing all of the duties that they are agreeing to perform for your district, and those records of the wages that you are paying them. And for all of this, remember, general ledger is also a part of all of this required documentation. So why do we require time and effort, that PAR and that semi-annual certification? Well, UGG 2 CFR Part 200 requires it. It has standards for documentation of personnel expenses. It mandates that charges be based on records that accurately reflect the work performed. Um, Now, it does not define it any longer. It used to years ago when it was in those circulars I mentioned. However, as an agency, we still require that PAR and our semi-annual certification because it meets these requirements in the UGG. Okay. Um, so again, we have defined our time and effort requirements as still being a PAR or a semi-annual certification. Again, when you are signing that document I keep talking about, agreeing to follow all of our requirements, it's in there that you are agreeing to maintain accurate time and effort documentation. And it has to align with your system of internal controls that's been established within your district. Okay, and why does it have to align with your internal controls? Because again, 2 CFR Part 200 requires that you make sure that you have effective accountability over the funds that we are providing you. And that's not just the funds, that's any property purchased with these funds and any assets. Okay, you are required to provide reasonable assurance that the funds are being managed in compliance with all of these regulations and laws and guidance that I am sharing with you. And then you must monitor, so you don't just spend the money and don't review what's going on. You have to monitor compliance. You have, excuse me, no, you have to monitor, like, what is it, grant management. You have to monitor, make sure funds are being spent properly, and then we have to monitor your compliance. And if we see where there is any non-compliance, we have to take action. Again, that's in 2 CFR Part 200. We don't like to do that, but we have had to do that in the past. And just always remember, and that's the whole point of this session, please document. Okay. So, record of time and effort, I went over this. Employee timesheets for those who are non-salaried, and a PAR or semi-annual certification. The employee timesheet, and again, this is in our guidance document that I mentioned. Timesheet should have your employee's full name, positions. We see a lot of times positions aren't listed, specific dates. Sometimes we see timesheets that have no dates, just a total amount of hours. That's not okay. You have to break down the days and the in and out times. So we don't want to see on March 23rd, you worked 6 hours. No, we want to see on March 23rd, you clocked in at 2 o'clock and you clocked out at 6 o'clock, right? Calculation of the time worked, calculation of other time, like if they were on sick leave or annual leave. It needs to be signed by the employee as well as the supervisor who has direct knowledge of that employee's work and dated. Okay. Personnel activity report. For those who may not be familiar, but I think most of us, if not all, are familiar with this. This is done when an employee is working on more than one cost objective. So are more than one federal award. Maybe they're working on a federal award and a non-federal award, an indirect cost activity and a direct cost activity. So this is where you see a PAR having to be required. A semi-annual certification is not okay because they're working on more than one cost objective. So if an employee is partially paid in any way with a federal sub-grant or a state grant, or they have to use a PAR, it must always account for 100% of the time worked, okay? And it has to be completed after the fact. And so I'll go over some more details about that because yes, we have seen some pre-populated PARs. So the PAR has to have the grant number and or the grant name. It has to have an identifier of the federal grant that the particular employee is being paid out of. It should show that distribution of time on each grant or subgrant or other cost objective. Again, the employee's name, position, same as the timesheets, specific dates, in and out times, calculation of time worked, signatures, all of that. There is a time where you can have a timesheet that is also considered a PAR. It just has to have all of those elements. If not, then you'll be maintaining a timesheet for those who are required to have timesheets and a PAR, so two different documents. But our guidelines memo shows all of how you can have a timesheet that can also be considered a PAR. So this is a personnel activity report. Your district may have a different format. It's not that it looks like this, it's that it has all of the elements I just went over, okay? So this particular PAR is what our agency is using. So yes, we at the State Department have to do it as well when we are paid with federal funds, okay? So I don't want anybody to say, oh my gosh, let's change our format. No, don't do that. As long as it has all the elements, you will be fine, okay? So here's a close-up, and it goes over what I just mentioned. It indicates the work hours. This is a PAR, so not a timesheet, y'all. So it has the work hours, and it has whether the employee is on sick leave or annual leave, or if your district uses the term PTO. It doesn't show any, weekend hours or anything, but it shows those days. But as you see, it's blocked out. You get it. So this is an example PAR. Now, this is an example of what we don't like to see. And we have seen this. So all of these examples we would have seen at some point in time, and that's why we're sharing it with you. So in this example, you have an employee who's Title I funded, okay? And if y'all can tell, it's just every single day, 2 hours. So if y'all working 2 hours on the weekends monthly, I think y'all might need to find another job. No, but yeah, so we have seen this where they are like just not taking time to really fill these things out, right? So this is what we don't want to see. And of course, nobody's on sick leave every day, so we've seen people working on holidays and the district was closed and it really wasn't working. Like we've seen all of that, okay? So make sure it's an accurate after the fact reflection of the work performed. So this is just what I went over, what we don't like to see. Yes, go ahead. No, I get it. And if you are working, that's different. But in these situations, they weren't working, right? We just, the gist of it is make sure it is what you're really, really doing. Okay. These are records that are going to be reviewed possibly at some point, and you don't want your district to have to pay money back because it was incorrect. Because if you're submitting this, it's possible that your finance office is paying you based off of this. It has to be correct. Okay. So this is what we want to, this is just a close up of what I just went over, what we don't want to see. Okay, now this is what we do want to see. So in this particular example, this is talking about this shows the employee was working like zero point 0.3 hours here, zero point 0.5, 2.3, like more so what could possibly actually be happening. Now, if you're on a set schedule where you are just that strict with your time, you work a set 2 hours or 5 hours. If it really is that, then it really is that. But this is for those situations where it really wasn't that. Okay, so we don't want to see just every single day, unless that is your every single day. You are from 8 to whatever 4 o'clock. You're just there, and that's just what it is. You get what I'm saying? So I don't want you to think you have to change it up if you're really working that consistent schedule. Okay, so this is just a close-up of making sure that your PAR is reflecting your name, the position title. It's showing the signatures of your employees, as well as the supervisor is signing off on it. And again, that's that person that has that direct knowledge of the work that was performed. And this is again showing like the time is split more so what this should look like. For me, I'm not, when I was paid out of ESSA, like my days with ESSA could be an hour here, 7.5 here, 5, none. It just depends on what I was working on. Okay. So this is an example of a timesheet as a PAR, and just for this, you just remember that all of the elements of the PAR have to be present as well as the timesheet for it to be considered a PAR. Semi-annual certifications are only for those employees who work on a single cost objective and are a single federal sub-grant or state grant. It certifies that this employee only did this particular type of work all day long. That's just all they did, right? They weren't working on CTE and Title I or what have you, right? So it certifies that they solely worked on this particular work for this certification period. It should also be signed by the employee and the supervisor who has direct knowledge of the work that was performed. You can have a situation where your district can utilize a blanket certification, and that is where there are multiple employees working on a single cost objective. So instead of having like 20 semi-annual certifications, they can have one semi-annual certification with all of those employees listed, and they are signing off. Again, that direct supervisor knows all 20 of these employees and is signing off that they solely worked on this particular grant for this particular time period. It's the same situation. It's reflecting 100% of the time. It's just not broken down like a PAR, and it's completed after the fact. And it again is signed off by the employee and the supervisor. And here's an example of a bad semi-annual certification. Again, we have seen where you were certifying time that hasn't happened before. So in this example, it was signed on December 28th that Melvin Green is going to work come January, right? No, that's not how you do time and effort. It should have certified that he had worked the previous 6 months on this particular grant award. Okay. This is an example of the blanket certification that I was mentioning that your districts can utilize if they would like to lessen the amount of documentation that they have to maintain, and it's listing the employees with that particular supervisor certifying that they 100% spent their time on this federal grant and they weren't working on any other cost objective. Yes. So if we want to, like we have several, but they're different schools. Right now we have one for each school and each employee. If we want to utilize this format, would our director of federal programs sign for all So you would probably need to have it by school because the director of, you said federal programs, wouldn't have that direct knowledge of the day-to-day work these employees at the school is doing. So that would be my recommendation, that it's by each school and not all schools on one blanket certification. Yeah, something like that. You're welcome. Yep. hmm Yes, because they can't certify before the time has occurred. hmm hmm Yes. You're welcome. All right. So this is still the blanket certification, just employees' names, titles, percentage of the funding that they're paid from, signature, and certification. You are certifying that they work solely on this particular cost objective federal award. Okay. All right. So this was something that was provided to us when we were looking at a particular district. And we just thought this was a useful document that they had where they are given instructions. They took the time to detail the instructions for completing the time and effort records. And this is their way to make sure that their whole district is in compliance. So this is something, if you as a district would like to implement, it's not required, but I was just sharing it because it was a good idea. Like when we were doing an audit of this particular district, we came across this and we asked if we could share this in presentations. Um, okay, so this is an example of a bad semi-annual certification. And so this particular document was not certifying anything. Really, that it has all of these sub funds on here, but this situation was not okay. Okay, so do not certify for more than one federal award on one semi-annual certification. Okay, don't do this. So this was something that we came across, and it does not comply. Okay. So just if this is something your district is utilizing, you can talk to me about it. But no, you can't have a certification that's covering all of your federal programs like this, okay? Because you're certifying that these employees worked on a particular cost objective federal award. All right, so this is another bad semi-annual certification. And this particular situation was the timing, okay? Do not add an, sorry, I want to look at this. Yeah, this is a situation where again they weren't certifying anything. So you need that certification verbiage. What are you certifying, right? And this particular situation, you can't see. Oh yeah, you can't see the dates. So this was July 2021, and it just took them an extended time to sign off on this particular work that had happened. You want to make sure that you do it more closer, more, is that how you say it? But you more closely um, to the time worked. There's always situations where, employees could leave, supervisors can leave, and then it needs to be, more timely to make sure that the documentation gets certified and includes all the right people and is signed off by the person who has that knowledge. So that's what this example is showing. All right, so how am I doing on time? Sorry. Um, I'm good. Okay, documentation to support employee benefits. So we're looking at your payroll registers, your tax forms, invoices from your insurance providers. So this is documentation that your finance department would be maintaining. So we're looking at that. And one thing I want to point out, because we see this sometimes, federal and state income taxes that are withheld from an employee's check is not employee benefits. And the reason I'm saying that is because when sometimes we get requests for reimbursements and they're separating the federal taxes withheld from the salaries. And that's not what employee benefits are. Okay. So when you are submitting for reimbursement for salaries, that's your gross pay that you have given your employees. Your employee benefits are those employer responsibility payments that are being made. Okay. And so again, that's more of our financial folks in here who would be working with that. And that is to help you not lose out on money when you're requesting reimbursement. Okay. So documentation to support purchase services. We want to see I'll go over contractual services and travel requirements, documentation for both of these types. So for your contractual services, we want to see an actual contract or agreement with terms of services, what you're actually agreeing to. It should be documented and signed off on. So we have seen contracts that don't have signatures. You know, your contracts should be signed by your district and whoever you are contracting services from. You should have purchase orders, purchase requisitions. Those requisitions are a part of your approval to purchase, right? And that purchase order is showing that you have that approval. Your invoices when you're making payments based off of these contracts and the services you received, any timesheets for any contractual work that's being done by those who need to complete timesheets, and documentation to support how it was solicited. So we do have to review to make sure that your district complied with how they were supposed to solicit, and it should be based off of your district's documented procurement policies and procedures. Okay, so we're looking for justifications for procurement. So like if your district is doing an emergency, we want to see that documentation that this was a true emergency. And I use this example a lot where we were doing an audit and the district was closed, you know, on your Christmas, December winter break. And they had an emergency and they said it was so that they could remodel a part of the high school before the kids came back. And it said remodel, like the roof didn't cave in, you know, it was, you know, that's not an emergency. Okay. So that justification was null and void, right? So just making sure that you are aware of what qualifies as an emergency and you document that emergency. If it's a sole source that has been properly vetted, just because they say they're a sole source doesn't mean they're a sole source. Okay. You have to do your due diligence, show the work, document it that you checked in and looked into whether or not they're truly a sole source, and have all that documentation for whenever someone wants to review to see how things were procured and to make sure you complied. So this is an example of a bad invoice for some services that an entity received. This is a real invoice. There was not enough details. So this is showing you that your invoices should have enough details to determine what you really were receiving. In this instance, they have lit art curriculum and training. They don't have how much curriculum, they just say one. Now, if one curriculum, you know, we don't know what this really looks like, but well, we found out what it really was, y'all. This was a situation where, sorry, but it was fraud. Okay. But they were saying that they were given this curriculum. It was $30,000 and it was for training that never happened. Okay. So just making sure that your invoices detail what you're really receiving. If it's training, when did the training happen? List the days, okay, on these invoices. Okay. This is another bad invoice. Again, it needs more details. This is saying monthly marketing for acceleration schools It doesn't have the month. What month was this for? What's the time period? Um, Details also help with making sure you don't pay for the same thing more than one time. Okay. So what was actually performed during the month? Are you getting what you're actually paying for? So this is not just for us, this is for you. You know, you get a lot of invoices in all the time, but take the time to review it. If they didn't provide you with a item and they didn't provide you a service, tell them, hey, we didn't get this. Redo this invoice. We're not paying this. Okay. Um, Also, like I mentioned before, we've seen where there are no contracts to support services procured. That's a no-no. You have to have contracts, okay? Purchase orders should not be contracts for services, okay? When you have services involved, you need that written contract with all the details of the services you're supposed to be provided. Um, we want to make sure that you have all of the required documentation to support all of services that were provided by these contracts. And as I mentioned earlier, when you are doing your contract administration, you're checking for these things. That's what you should be checking for, making sure at whatever interval you got whatever services, okay? And contracts also help with auditing and monitoring. We're referring back to this contract when we're doing our visits and our reviews. Okay, so this is an example of a contract that we came across. Must have services and it needs to be signed. So you see here, this is the client and they didn't sign anything. Okay, and this is what they provided us. So making sure it's signed, it's a legal document. Take it seriously, read over it, review it, get it amended, get it to where it fits what you are looking for and sign off on it. Okay. So for travel, lodging, we're looking to make sure that you have a conference itinerary or an agenda to support why you're doing this travel, why you're lodging. Once you have stayed, make sure you have an itemized lodging receipt that shows zero, because we verify that it shows that somebody stayed there, that there wasn't a situation where the room wasn't occupied. Um, Mileage, making sure that you are documenting with a log the dates traveled, where they were going, the amount of miles, supported with those MapQuest. That's not on here, but you're verifying that, okay, if they traveled 100 miles, did that make sense? Have that to support your mileage. Meals, making sure that you are documenting departure and arrival times. This is for federal funds, because tying back to those assurances, terms, and conditions. I know with your state funds that aren't grants, you are utilizing your travel per diems and things like that. But for your federal funds, you have to comply with the GSA rates and things like that. I hope y'all are familiar with that. And meals have to be given dependent on when you leave and come back. And the purpose of the meals is supported by that travel. Also, making sure meals aren't being reimbursed when the conference itself is covering lunch, or if it says dinner or breakfast, you can't request reimbursement for those meals. And never, 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 alcoholic beverages is a no-no. Y'all know that. Having that registration to support that you attended the conference or whatever it is you're attending, that supports the payment, for the the conference agenda supports the payment for the registration, and that registration confirmation showing it was paid. Copies of checks to support all of the payments made. So I didn't talk about that in salaries and all of that, but you always have to have those copies of check payments. We do ask for that. Any other transportation that's taken, like airfare, of course, the showing that the airfare was paid. Again, that conference, basically with travel, unless it's like maybe like school to school or something like that, when it comes to like a conference or training, you're going to have the itinerary, the agenda to support it. Any itemized receipts, if they're traveling and they have a rental car, or if they take a metro or something like that, you can't just pay the metro without a receipt. They have to have that receipt for reimbursement. Okay. So, like I've been saying, documentation, even if it's $7, document. Okay. 10 minutes. Okay. All right. Conference agenda. This is just an example of a conference agenda showing where, lunch was paid here. So we wouldn't want to see this employee being reimbursed for lunch for this particular day. Okay. So that's what this is showing. Again, buffet breakfast. Now, if it's continental breakfast, that is something that can be reimbursed for breakfast if that is your district's policy. So one thing you have to remember is some of this is still tied to your district policy when they're more strict. Okay. Hotel folio. This is just showing that we want to show zero balance. Okay. This person stayed. Oh, that's me. Yeah. So I stayed, and it's a zero balance. That's what we want to see because I was actually there. So support for supplies and materials, invoice or receipt, purchase order, receiving document, packing slips. Okay, packing slips can help a lot when you are checking to make sure you got what you were supposed to receive. Documentation to support any solicitation for these goods or services. So the same with any services that you contracted for, same with any goods that however you had to procure it, that you are supporting it with that method is supported with documentation. Okay. Any questions? Yes. In regards to the contractual services, uh-huh. Where, like, in our student department, we have a lot of consultants that we use, and we have the invoices. But I don't think I recall seeing a contract. I have to check with our bookkeeper, but we should have a contract that goes along with those consultants. With those consultants. Yes. Mm-hmm. Are y'all procuring them? Are y'all using like an agency, or are y'all procuring those services yourself? We're using an agency. You're using the agency. So in that situation, your procurement office should have the documentation to support pulling consultants from those agencies. So if it's a situation where your procurement office is not using like an agency and they're going out and procuring services from this one-off consultant over here or whoever, then they would have a contract directly from that consultant. But if it's through like an agency where they're pulling, they should have all that documentation from working with that agency to support pulling services from those type of consultants. Yeah. You're welcome. Anything else? All right, so it's the end of the day. I know y'all ready to go. So these are some resources. I'm sure they're going to share with y'all these slides. These links all work. But the first one is to the Code of Federal Regulations. Remember, I went over some of those codes earlier. This is a link to UGG that I've been talking about, and EDGAR, which are the education regulations. And then these are some training videos for grants management. And then this is a direct link to the guidelines document that I went over for the required documentation for expenditures. If you want to contact me directly, here's my email. I don't have my phone number, but if you do have my phone number, I welcome phone calls. I welcome emails. Program offices and I work closely together, so we answer questions together when needed. So thank y'all so much.